everybody, my name is Puppetine from the Geeky Puppet Show here on the Geeky Puppet Show today. For what? For the Sandman, episodes 3 and 4. We're going week by week, 2 episodes at a time, covering Neil Gaiman's latest adaptation of the Sandman. And, of course, joining me, as always, to authenticate our stream is, well, Dalton, the Authenticator.
Yes, it is my job, and today I'm authenticating in hell. Both episodes.
Well, yeah, I mean, you are right. The 4th episode is a large part in hell.
Yeah, and of course we have a Constantine, and Constantine is any member of the Constantine family has a bit of a thing with demons, both personal and literal. So
yes,
yeah.
yes. So, well, as always, we do cover the episodes, but we also give a brief recap. And I actually, one thing that I do appreciate about this show is that it's very quick to recap. The events that happen are pretty much, other than the Corinthian subplot that's thrown in, it's pretty much, if you've read the issue, you've gotten an idea of what's going to happen in this episode.
Yeah. The translation is another matter entirely, but yes, the episodes do follow the issues fairly closely. For example, these 2 episodes are Dream a Little Dream of Me and A Hope in Hell, respectively, which they are also titled, which makes everything nice and neat.
Yes. Rhaegar says, in Soviet Russia, demon have a thing with you.
I mean, it is the Constantine family bloodline we're talking about. That probably isn't a foreign concept.
No, probably not. But yes, so this first episode, it does primarily feature Jenna Coleman as Joanna.
That just popped into my head. Rasputin with a Constantine. Hold on.
Oh, jeez. But yes, it is Joanna Constantine. That's her name in this, right?
Yeah. Now, the thing with Joanna is there was a character who was related to John in the comics, which was his Regency era ancestor, I do believe, named Joanna Constantine, Lady Joanna Constantine. The problem is they gender flipped John's role and gave her the same name and didn't even bother changing it, which gets things. And the other problem is, and this was the first thought I had with regards to this whole not being able to use John Constantine because rights issues thing. You have Mad Hetty there, and Mad Hetty's thing is that she is an immortal. So why, in the love of God, did you not just get rid of Mad Hetty and had Jenna Coleman play Joanna as the same character, just happening to be an immortal? That would have made so much more sense.
I actually thought it was going to be that twist. I thought it was actually going to be Joanna from 300 years ago that Sandman knew. But
because Mad Hetty doesn't really serve super high levels of function in the series, and it's already an immortal that you could use. So, nah.
Yeah. But I am going to go ahead and say that I'm not bothered by it. Listen, we've had two adaptations of Constantine, and if rumors are to be believed, one of those versions of Constantine are going to continue. And Matt Ryan, from what I've heard, is rather tired of the role.
I mean, he's earned the right. He's been in 2 different animated projects, 3 if you're counting the sequels to Justice League Dark separately.
Yeah.
And also, Constantine City of Demons, and his own series, which was sadly short-lived, and Legends of Tomorrow, and he's voice acted, I think, also on Harley Quinn a couple of times. So he can be tired of the role all he wants, but I think I speak for everyone when I say he is the definitive Constantine in the same way that RDJ is the definitive Iron Man and Chris Evans is the definitive Captain America.
I can agree with that. I know that there are people that are going to have problems with the character being Joanna now. I liked her. I like Jenna Coleman, though. I have a bias. I'm not going to lie. I have a bias. It's Jenna Coleman. I cannot, you know.
Now, to be fair, I have a bias, generally speaking, against Jenna Coleman. I don't like her. I didn't like her as Clara. The only times I liked her as Clara were in the Oswald Oswin episode, where she was actually a Dalek and had gone insane, and the Victorian government era Clara that I also liked. However, that being said, my bias against Jenna Coleman being said, I do not have a problem with any of the casting choices throughout this series because all of the actors are trying their darndest to carry this show. And it is the one aspect of the show that works. So I don't have a problem with the woke question in this particular case. I, however, am too focused on everything around that question to really give a shit about the wokening, because wokeness or no wokeness, there are problems with this adaptation, and I'd rather we focus more on the actual problems qualitatively with the adaptation. Now, granted, wokeness can be a qualitative issue more times than not. Let's be perfectly fair.
I'm going to be honest here. I have stopped using the term woke for years now, because that when your complaint about a series boils down to, oh, it's woke because look, there's a woman in it. I'm just not subscribing to that. I can't subscribe to that.
The term wokeness isn't particularly useful. I'm mostly using it in the sense that everyone would get the general gist.
No, I get what
I don't even like the term woke to begin with. I prefer the old school term of social justice ideology, because that's the main issue. I don't care about the demographics of the people involved. They care about whether it's used to push ideology or not.
And I don't think it. If I may, I just don't see that.
No, there's very little, if any, of that to be spoken of in the show, and that's why I don't really. I don't really. It's not that wokeness isn't a valid vector of criticism when it is impactful to the story. I just think that the qualitative issues with this adaptation have very little, if anything, to do with the wokening, and the actors are all respecting the fact that they are in an adaptation of Neil Gaiman's Lord of the Sandman. Now, whether Neil Gaiman himself respected that, or whether the writers of the show respected that, is a completely different matter. But we will get into that as we come to it.
But yeah, basically, Joanna Constantine has, dreams sand. And, he decides to go ahead. She has to deal with a little matter. I do have to say, I did not picture a demon ripping a person in half as he was climbing out. I just didn't see it coming.
No, it wasn't really in the comics, because at that point in Constantine's history, he was more of the occult detective and less the demon-kicking exorcist type.
Yeah. I think they wanted to bolster that up a little bit.
Yeah.
But that was fine with me. I mean, when it was done, the scene was through. She does go outside, and there stands Dream, Morpheus, whatever name you would like to call him, and he wants his hand. And Jenna Coleman basically says, bugger off. Goes back home.
But, because a Constantine is a Constantine is a Constantine, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. Doesn't matter what you call him or her. It's Constantine.
I would have liked a line of something like "my cousin John" or something, because it's not as though every member of the Constantine family bloodline isn't constantly getting into shenanigans. Even in the original comic, there's a mention when they meet Joanna for the first time that there was also a Jack Constantine in their family that was up to all sorts of supernatural shenanigans. So throwing in a "my cousin John" line would have been nice, maybe.
I don't know how I would have felt about that, if I'm honest. I mean, if you're going to have her as a place for John, you can't have John in there and give him the same story.
Well, no, but I mean, again, you could have played it off as like a family resemblance, or those wacky Constantines, I tell you, always getting into demon shenanigans.
But
sort of thing.
But Dream is able to track down Constantine through her dreams, and pretty much says, "You give me my sand, and your nightmare that seems to never end will not be haunting you again." And so she tries to remember, and that's when she does. Left it with a girlfriend. And, well, I will say, because it's been a long time since I read it, I did glance at the pages to see exactly how it played out because it was a little different. I forgot that the father was supposed to be splayed out against the wall, still living.
Yeah, there was a lot more horror element and a lot more nightmares literally coming to life in the comic, and I was desperately missing that here.
Yeah.
I think the horror elements, and even some of the dark humor, like last episode, when he summoned the Fates in the comic, there was a lot more bantering between them, and given how short last week's second episode was, I could have done with more of the dark humor because that was one of the things I always liked about the Sandman, and so too here, I could have done more with a lot more of the pulpy comic, 90s humor or 90s horror that we didn't seem to get. And I get that some of it is budgetary, but it's also it makes it feel hollow and lacking in atmosphere again, and that's kind of my running problem with the entire thing is they cliff notes the crap out of things that were actually in the comic, and they often remove a lot of the grandeur and the gravitas, and then they blow a bunch of money on stuff that wasn't even in the comic, which was my only complaint really with the exorcism scene with Joanna, because that wasn't in the comic and it looked very expensive, and I'm just sitting there thinking, the money that was used on this seed could have been used in so many better ways. But that's not here.
Yeah. I still think the scene was a good setup for her. And of course, you've seen the articles that are already spanning off. Oh, look, maybe there's a Joanna Constantine spinoff in the works. No, there's not.
Please no. John didn't even get a full season of his show. Can we not rub salt in that particular wound already?
He got a full season. Let's be fair. He got a full season.
13 episodes to me is like the bare minimum. In my mind, a full season is closer to like 18 to 20 episodes, but that might just be me.
Wow. I mean, you have a lot of files for Disney Plus then, huh?
They cripple a lot of their shows by not giving
6
them
episodes only.
But yeah, 6, and then if we're feeling extra charitable, 9, and you will be happy with this. No, Disney, no, I would. Never mind. That's for a different day. But point being, like, yes. John barely got a wink and a nod in his show. Can we not rub salt in that wound when? And again, I don't care about the wokeness. Jenna Coleman did fine. Joanna is a perfectly serviceable member of the Constantine family, which is how I am now thinking of her. But let's let the sleeping dogs lie and not poke everyone right in the feels all too soon here.
I don't know. If I got to watch 13 hours of Jenna Coleman, I don't know if I can complain, Dalton. These are the limits. These are the lines. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I know. It's like me and Guillermo del Toro. Anything that Guillermo del Toro makes, I will be in the theater watching because it's Guillermo del Toro. But that's neither here nor there. But nevertheless, let's not even deal with spin-offs. Honestly, a lot of the comic spin-offs could make pretty decent episodes of this show, and I would rather see them incorporated as such rather than as something completely different.
So that's pretty much how it ends. They find the girlfriend. She has been clutching the sand, and she is pretty much dead. She is in a state of living death. The sand is the only thing that keeps her alive, and well, you see Dream. He takes the bag.
Dream is not having any of this because dreams are supposed to remain in the dreaming, not supposed to be walking around, out in the world.
So he takes the bag, and of course, Constantine, as in the book, says, "Help her, damn it!" And Morpheus thinks about it a moment.
And Dream is like, well, okay, this seems fine.
Gives her one last dream, a good dream. And that's a good moment. And then I'm conflicted. I am both annoyed at Patton Oswalt, and I also like Patton Oswalt. So, like, anytime he shows up and I get to hear him, it's a mixed thing.
The thing with Patton Oswalt is, Matthew, I was the biggest hater of the idea of casting Patton Oswalt as Matthew. You can go back and watch my own podcast of the Storm, number 116, where we discuss the various casting announcements for like 2 hours. And you can see my reaction to Patton Oswalt being cast. However, as with Jenna Coleman as Joanna, it's not the casting of him that I mind. And in retrospect, I like what he's doing. My issue is the way they're using Matthew, and by extension, the way they are choosing to treat Dream. In the comics, he is every inch the old world monarch in all the grandeur and dignity that would imply. In the show, though, a lot of times it feels like everyone is walking on eggshells around him and basically treating him like Joffrey Baratheon. And this scene here in episode 3 is exactly where it starts, because Matthew the freaking Raven, mind you, says to Dream pretty much flat out that he would rather be taking orders from Lucien than him, and guilt trips him into helping the girl, and then guilt trips him again when he sees him do it out the window, and then talks to him about it afterwards. And the annoyance I have with it isn't how it's framed. In a sane Sandman adaptation, we would be on Dream's side with this, because he is the Dream King and no one should gainsay his rightful rule. In the show, however, it's framed as he's being a childish, out of touch monarch, and everyone else is framed as in the moral right over it. And that's where I take the issue.
I don't see that. I'm going to be honest. I do see, like, well, this was a great king. He fell for I can't remember, almost a century. Yeah, and then suddenly, whenever he's back, he has to regain his power. He has to go. Even when he kills, like in the second episode, when he kills the gargoyle because he made it and he needs that energy, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like it's his right. He made it. He doesn't want to do it, but he understands.
No, and I'm not saying they're framing Dream as entirely like bloodthirsty or anything. I'm just annoyed with how they're framing him as basically the figurehead of the dreaming rather than its rightful master. And it very much feels like Lucien and Matthew and the other major arcana, like Cain and Abel, or like Marv Pumpkinhead when eventually we see him, are actually the ones doing the work. And in fact, Dream is again kind of just a also ran figurehead of his own freaking realm. And the show seems to want us to be on Lucien and Matthew's side rather than on Dream's side. And
I'm just gonna have to disagree. I mean, I just don't see it that way. I see it the way that you said we should feel. If I'm honest, that is how I feel at this moment. Like, whenever he said, "She's already dead. You can't do anything for her. We need to just go." And whenever Constantine, like in the book, has a fit, Morpheus gives mercy, gives one last.
Yeah, no, but the difference is, in the comics, Dream is framed as confused by Constantine's request at first, and then once he realizes what John is asking, because in the comics it was in fact John, he goes, "Oh, yes, that makes total sense. Let me do that." In the show, it's framed more like he is being cruel and he is embarrassed to have anyone see him help. Which
I don't see the embarrassment. I can see almost the cruelty, but that's from Constantine's point of view.
the embarrassment comes in later when he finds out that Matthew was watching him out the window, and Matthew actually compliments him on it, and Dream has a minor hissy fit of "Don't you dare spy on me again," which implies that he was embarrassed by the notion of having to help people, which is not in character for Dream. If it were Desire or Despair or one of the other endless, that would be in character, but not for Dream. Dream is the serious, bookish member of the family, if anything. He's all about his duties.
Well, I don't know if it helps you at all, but I am going to go ahead and say, just from my perspective, somebody who's only read the first volume and somebody who hasn't read it in years, I do see it in the way that you would prefer. I'm sorry you don't, but that's how I'm just going to go ahead and say that.
It's not just contained to this episode, though. I'm also informing that based on other episodes that we'll get to eventually.
Okay, that's fair. I'm going to try to read the second volume if I can before we finish.
We get to the part of the season, because season 1 of the show actually covers 2 volumes. It covers Preludes and Nocturnes and the second volume, The Doll's House.
Yes, I'm slowly realizing that, because in the next episode we go to hell. Yes, we get to see Lucifer themselves. I don't know. It's a little confusing. But,
I think it's still a he. It just happens to be played by Gwendolyn Christie. I think it's supposed to still be
Christie. You know, I've been watching Game of Thrones all the way through, and it's
Brianna's hard.
One of my favorite scenes is during the fight. The first creature she names a direwolf. I was like, oh, but no. I mean, we get to look. 4 is where there is definitely good, but there's a confusing amount of scenes in it, because you're also dealing with what's his name, John something.
John D. and his mother Ethel Cripps.
Yes, because Ethel basically kills herself. She gives this amulet that's been protecting her, keeping her alive, to John to prove that he needs to defend himself against
that he can survive without the ruby, or that he can survive without resorting to the addictive nature of the ruby. I think is the way it's supposed to be.
And John D looks at that sacrifice and says, "Screw that!" Because all in this episode, he is pretty much heading.
Well, no, he's grateful to his mother for making the sacrifice, and I think he does still feel connect. He feels, I think, more connected to her after she did it than he did through the years when he was being lied to and then was locked up by her. But he still wants his freaking ruby, because for the purposes of the show, the ruby can create anything that one can dream of, and he has altered it so that it only works for him. So now he wants the ability to basically control reality using the Dreamstone.
He wants to dream of a world without dream. And I mean,
John, you've been living in it for a century. It's not a good thing, mate. No,
it's definitely not. The porn bots have decided to come in, so let me just block this user. Yes. Anyway, as I was saying, other than that aspect, we get to meet another character who is good. She does tell little white lies, but she is good. She's scared because John admits to being a murderer. I don't think anyone could blame her, and I don't even think he blames her, really. It's just, oh, yes, that would terrify you, wouldn't it? Oh, dear. Yeah, she's got kids, and she's worried. She wants to get out, and she tries at a gas station, but it doesn't work out. But because she is so good, she goes ahead and takes him to get the ruby, and then is about to leave. But that means we need to address what happens to Dream. We get to look at Dream through hell. A lot of walking through hell. It's almost like it's the. If Froggy was here, he would be saying, "Wow, did J.R.R. Tolkien talk about the first half? Right, this first half of the episode." But yes, Dream goes to hell. He knocks on the gate. The gatekeeper, Squatter Bloat, gives him a hard time, and then proceeds to not know
or proceeds to immediately regret this. And Matthew is essentially along providing color commentary and or asking questions to prompt the necessary exposition all the while through.
We also get to see Dream in another aspect because there is a woman who is imprisoned from 10,000 years ago who apparently was with a tribe that called themselves the First Men, and Dream loved her dearly, but she betrayed him.
Yeah,
and thus,
not his spurned ex lover, because he wanted her to marry him, but she knew actually that mortals shacking up with the endless never goes well, and inevitably spurned him. He did not take it well, and thereby condemned her to hell for 10,000 freaking years. Now, in Dream's defense, and this seems like a fairly indefensible action, but in Dream's defense, the only reason why he fell in love with her in the first place was because his younger sibling Desire was playing shenanigans with Dream's emotions, because the endless can affect each other. It's just considered a massive social faux pas to do so.
But we get to see Dream in a new light because the actor, like halfway whenever he sees her, changes into into another man that goes ahead and has still long hair, but has a darker complexion to match that of, what is her name? Nada. Yes, and that. I mean, for a being such as that, it makes sense. So
yeah, he conformed to the clearest point of reference that anyone has of him, and since at the time that Nada lived, most people were African. She sees him as African. This is also in the comics, so I have no issues with it. I do, however, have issues that we didn't see it before, because in the comics there's actually, and I know, minimal to no DC connections this time, but in the comics, one of my all-time favorite scenes of the first volume was when Dream reveals himself to Mr. Miracle and the Martian Manhunter, and John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, last of the Martians, sees Dream not as the humanoid that we've been seeing him as, but as Lord Lazoral, the Martian deity of dreams. One of my all-time favorite moments that we can't see in this because no DC connections. But
that's painful.
I will do my best not to complain too much about my DC connections, because I knew full well ahead of time that they weren't going to do them. It annoys me because a lot of my favorite moments were those. Like, for example, in the comics, after Squatter Bloat gives Dream a hard time, Etrigan the Demon of, Jason Blood and Etrigan fame is the one to escort Dream both through hell and to Nada to play a joke on him. Which I miss Etrigan.
Yeah, but sadly we can't have those because contract reasons. Ugh.
Yeah, and according to Neil Gaiman, which is why I'm quite miffed at Neil Gaiman at the moment, even if they had struck a deal on HBO Max, they still wouldn't have had the DC connections, to which I call bullshit. Or if he is being sincere, I call even further bullshit. Either he's bullshitting in the sense of, yes, you definitely would have had them, or he's bullshitting in the sense of, why would you leave them out if you had the option?
I deny you. Yeah. So ultimately, this leads to Dream getting to see Lucifer, and Lucifer calls all the demons in hell because one demon has his helm. And the one ends up coming up and says, "No, I'm not going to give it to you. You're going to have to fight me for it."
The demon Koronzon.
Yep. And it is a game because he chooses, Morpheus chooses himself as as his champion, and while the demon chooses Lucifer.
Yeah. I have minor issues with this scene. The first and foremost of which being budgetary, because they just didn't have the budget to display all the demons of hell, so they kind of didn't. Like, they play with perspective a little bit so that like the demons are all the way down there, so we don't have to bother either putting a bunch of people in makeup or using a bunch of CGI to actually show them. The second is more plot oriented, which is I'm not sure what direction they were trying to. Now, the obvious answer to this question from a production standpoint is we have Gwendolyn Christie, and gosh darn it, we're going to use Gwendolyn Christie while we have her. Perfectly understandable. However, I then question what is Corazon doing there? Because you could have had it that Lucifer, had seen Corazon with it, took it from him, and then was keeping it behind their throne or something. And then we could have proceeded right to the challenge. Or you could have had it that that Corazon was in the duel, but this way sort of ends up having to try and have it both ways, where Corazon is there, but Lucifer is the one doing the fighting, and I'm just like, you could have picked a lane here and saved yourself a lot of trouble, but you picked neither, and now I'm annoyed because I also really loved from like a occult lore nerd perspective that Corazon was in the original comic, because for those that don't know, the demon Corazon actually has a bit of an occult legacy. He was first recorded in the notes of the Elizabethan court magician John Dee, not to be confused with the character, and was then referenced again in the notes of Aleister Crowley, he of 19th century occultism fame. So it was really cool to see Corazon both referenced and playing a fairly substantive role in the comic, and now we just have Lucifer, which I get it, because again, we have Gwendolyn Christie, and gosh darn it, we're going to use Gwendolyn Christie while we have her, but at the same time, either just leave Corazon out or have Corazon play the role he's supposed to play. Please don't have it both ways.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I will say that I know certain people who had no connection to Sandman, who basically were only watching it because, oh, it's the new big show on Netflix. Okay, let's give it a shot. And they absolutely loved this scene. They loved Lucifer and Dream's battle.
Yeah, no, it's still a good. The problem is, because Sandman is such an amazing piece. Even a very flawed and very bad version of it is still going to be good enough for most people. I just wish that they either had gotten to see the Sandman unmolested, like a lot of us did, or that the Netflix version was at least trying a little bit harder. But yeah, no, a bad copy of Sandman is still better than 90% of what you're going to find on Netflix, but it's still a bad copy in comparison to everything Sandman related.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, Dream gets his helm back. And Lucifer actually goes ahead and says, why? Because Dream is kind of celebrating a little bit because he did get it back, and he's like, well, I'll remember this. Then Lucifer's like,
the ruler of hell is honorable, therefore I shall remember this in future. And Lucifer just starts laughing because you thought you were going to get out of here.
You think I'm going to let you go? What are you talking about? No. What makes you think we'll let you leave? Dreams have no power here, and this is where she is mistaken, because Dream points out
the mugging of the Lord of Hell in front of all the demons happens.
Tell me this: what power does hell have if none of your inhabitants can dream of heaven? Huh? Yeah. And that kind of puts Lucifer in his place.
I kind of wish it had been played a little bit more cocky though, because in the comic it was played almost literally like a mugging. Because for those that don't know or might be a little bit slow on the uptake, in the comic he's not being metaphorical. It's a literal threat, as in, I am the Lord of Dreams. Your power in hell is reliant on being able to inflict pain on people. If you don't let me out of here, I will snap my fingers and I will take away hell's ability to inflict pain by removing people's ability to dream of heaven. And then hell will literally just cease to exist because it won't be able to sustain itself without people's pain to fuel it.
Yep. Yep. But it's a very good scene. And with his sand, with his helm, now all he needs is his ruby, and he's able to get it to it, and then he touches it, and he realizes he can't use it. Boom!
Yeah.
Yeah, he's thrown
the ruby throws a little bit of a shit fit because John has altered it so that only he can use it, which means that the person who made it and is technically a part of it cannot use it anymore, and it actually steals more power from him when he tries to use it.
Yeah. So that was a twist, and that is where it ends. I'm going to be honest. This is all like getting to relive parts of this again. It feels very good. There's a lot to enjoy. And nothing as of yet has disturbed me. So, I will say that I am looking forward to the next 2 episodes. And after that, we're going to be into the second part of things. We're reaching the midsection here, as it were.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to wait and see how that goes. Good to see you too, Tillium. Do you have any final thoughts, Dalton?
Again, I've made my feelings clear on this. Yes, if you've never had anything to do with Sandman, this I'm sure will do you just fine. But that's like saying a several times over photocopied version of the Mona Lisa will do you just fine if you've never seen the real one. To which I would just say there's an audible audiobook version of the Sandman, which is pretty serviceable, and of course there's the original comic. Either of those are better versions of this than this here. I made the analogy last time to this version of the Sandman is a little bit like a corpse. It still resembles the person that you once knew and cared about and loved, but all of the animation and all of the life and all of the soul is sucked out and is kind of mocking you if you know a person all that well. And unfortunately, I don't want to go full I know the Sandman and you there are no Sandman, but it gets to that point at some point later. So don't start with this. If this is your first exposure to Sandman, please go and read the original comic or at least listen to the audiobook.
I have to kind of disagree. I think as it stands, it's the other way around. Like when I was a kid, I loved reading, loved the Harry Potter books, but that's only because I saw the movies first. And the movies, while they're serviceable, they aren't quite as good, and that happens for a lot of adaptations. I think this series, while it might not do it justice, like whole justice for the book, I think it's going to spawn it could spawn a whole new era of Sandman fans who never thought they would be.
I mean, maybe, but I'm terrified of the notion that someone somewhere is going to watch the show, be inspired to read the comics, and actually come away with it thinking that the show was better because that was what they were exposed to first.
Well, Dalton, all I can say to that is there are people who think The Last Jedi is a good Star Wars movie. So we can't help everyone, but we can help.
I know, but it's a little bit like if your first exposure to a Disney movie is the Disney live action remakes. I'm sure you'll enjoy them fine, but you lost something by not going with the original animated versions first.
There's a lot of debate to be had there. But because they're also different. But as it stands right now, I think the Sandman is a perfectly it is a solid show, as it were, right now. And I'm wondering where it will go, and I hope it will finish as strong as it started. But I don't know. I haven't finished yet. I've only seen the 4 episodes. Dalton, yeah, I know. Dalton here.
Yeah, I've watched the whole first season, and again,
second time?
it's a bit like looking at a corpse, even if it's a corpse of someone that I used to love a lot. It's still a corpse.
Yep. But that is pretty much it for us. You've heard our thoughts, and we want to hear yours. So make sure to leave comments down below. Also, make sure to like and subscribe. Helps out the channel. We're going to finish reviewing the Sandman. So what? We have only a few more weeks left, and then we'll be done.
Yep.
But you'll have to wait and see. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We had a great old time. Hope you did too. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye!
Cheers, guys. We'll finish the autopsy later.
Autopsy. Oh.